Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Windows Business Weekly. My name is Russell Smith. You might know me from the Petri IT Knowledge Base or from Pluralsight as one of their trainers. Now this is my new YouTube channel, and in this channel I'm going to be focusing specifically on Microsoft technologies. So that means primarily Windows, Azure and Office 365. And this channel is for IT professionals or for enthusiasts who are interested in how to improve business productivity, because that's always been my main motivator for working in IT, is to help people basically improve the way they do things and make things more efficient. So this is a great time to be starting this podcast because Microsoft had their annual Build conference in Seattle last week, and there are 4 major announcements that I'd like to cover in this first episode. So let's start with the Windows Subsystem for Linux. So Microsoft announced last week that they're introducing version 2 of this technology for Windows insiders by the end of June this summer, and hopefully for everybody else maybe this year or maybe by spring next year. Not quite sure yet about what that deadline is going to be, but you can get your hands on it pretty soon. So if you're not familiar with WSL, it's basically a technology for developers that allows you to run a Linux distribution on top of Windows. So it kind of becomes part of Windows itself, allowing you to run a shell like Bash, for instance, to compile binaries or to administer other Linux systems using Bash. And of course it can also be used by system administrators, so if you haven't given it a go, it's well worth a try. Now one of the advantages of this system is that Microsoft have said that basically, well, instead of installing Linux in a VM and having all the overhead and management associated with that, of course a VM takes up quite a lot of resources, the WSL system basically uses an emulator which translates Linux system calls into Windows system calls. So you don't need a VM in order to run those Linux utilities. Now, one of the issues with that is that the translator, or the emulator if you like, doesn't support all system calls. So it means that not all applications that work in Linux will run in the Windows Subsystem for Linux, and this can be a problem. Performance is also an issue, especially things connected to the file system. Now in version 2 of this technology, Microsoft are using a real Linux kernel instead of an emulator. So basically what they're saying is that things like file system operations can be up to 20 times faster with the new system. But because it's using a real kernel, now a VM is involved. So one of the advantages of this technology was that, okay, we weren't going to need to use a VM. So what's changed? So Microsoft have put the Linux kernel into what they're calling a lightweight utility VM. Now, Windows 10 already has this technology built into it. And for instance, if you've used Windows Defender Application Guard or the new Sandbox technology in Windows 10 19H1, they also use this kind of virtualization. And instead of completely isolating the VM from the underlying host operating system, these lightweight utility VMs, they provide quite a lot of integration with the OS. So they provide some kind of virtualization, but without that isolation that you usually associate with Hyper-V, for instance. So that gives us various advantages, and it allows us to run Linux like an application on top of Windows with all the integration that we need, but using a real Linux kernel. So that's quite exciting. Microsoft have said that, you know, the Windows Subsystem for Linux user experience is not going to change, and that it will start up in under 2 seconds, that performance will be better, that you'll be able to run a wider variety of applications. So for instance, you can run Docker for Linux inside WSL, which you couldn't do with the old technology. And it's basically compatible with all system calls. So you have that greater usage for this technology, if you like. What else can I say about it? So I think the most important thing is that it's using a real Linux kernel. And that has another advantage in that Microsoft won't need to update their emulation engine each time a new Linux kernel is released. So they'll just be able to basically pipe the new Linux kernel into this system without all of that work required. So you'll be able to get your hands on the new Linux kernel in WSL pretty soon after an official stable release comes online. Now, I haven't actually used this technology. I hope it's as great as Microsoft are saying, but I'm quite excited to use it. I've started using WSL quite a lot in my work recently. I mean, I'm a Windows guy, but you can't avoid Linux these days. It's everywhere. And it does save me having to start up a full VM. Despite the fact that it's going to use a real Windows kernel, you still need to download a distribution from the Microsoft Store, whether it be Ubuntu or SUSE. That works exactly the same. So it's not that Microsoft are making their own Linux distribution. That doesn't exist at the moment. The user experience hasn't changed. Now, the second announcement made at Build, and kind of related to WSL, is that Microsoft are releasing a new terminal for Windows called the Windows Terminal. Now, you might ask, why does Microsoft want a new Windows terminal? Why is it needed? So Microsoft want to develop the terminal that we have in Windows already, and they have made some changes over the last couple of years. But they're basically saying that the things that they want to do break backwards compatibility. So they've kind of come to the end of the road with the existing terminal, and to add the features that they want, they just need to start from fresh. So you know that backwards compatibility is all important in Windows. They're basically saying that, well, if you run your old batch file scripts or whatever in the new Windows terminal, the chances are that they might not work. So this was basically the red line. So what is the new Windows terminal going to offer us? Well, probably the most obvious thing is tabs. So you'll be able to open various different sessions, whether it be a Windows command line, PowerShell, whether you want to connect to WSL or any other supported language in there. You'll be able to have several tabs open all at the same time. You'll be able to use emojis, hyperlinks. There's a graphics engine in there that provides much better performance. And it looks really cool. And I think, while it's very much a visual thing that we can see in the video demonstration, again, I've not been able to actually use it myself. Hopefully a lot of these new features, especially the tabs, of course, will help keep developers happy. And that's all important if we want great new applications developed for Windows. Not only that, Microsoft are open sourcing this technology. So you already have it actually available now up on GitHub, and you can compile it. You can compile it yourself if you're able to do that. But if you want to wait for it, then it will be available via the Microsoft Store at some point. I don't remember exactly when they said availability was going to be for that, whether it was going to be the fall release or the next spring release of Windows. I can't remember, but I think it's going to be coming along pretty soon. Okay, Microsoft Enterprise Search is coming to Windows 10, I think in 20H1 if I remember correctly. So you're going to get Microsoft Enterprise Search in File Explorer, I think on the taskbar as well. But what is Microsoft Enterprise Search? They're not really doing a great job of explaining exactly what that is. So Microsoft Enterprise Search is a unified search experience which includes Office 365, and if you're using it on Windows 10, files on your local disk. So you can already see Microsoft Enterprise Search in action. So if you open up the default Office page for Office 365 and you see the search bar at the top, that is Microsoft Enterprise Search, and it searches right across your Office 365 tenant. Now, we have a pretty messy search experience across applications and Windows at the moment. So for instance, if you go into Office on the web, you get Microsoft Enterprise Search. If you use search on the taskbar, you get something slightly different. If you use search in Delve, again, you get something that's a bit like Enterprise Search, but not quite the same thing. And what Microsoft are going to do is bring this enterprise search feature into all of those applications and Windows so that we get the same experience across all applications and devices. And I think that's really important to give users that experience, because it can be quite frustrating that if you search in one place, you get different results than you might, for instance, in the web browser. We need a consistent experience across the board, and that is what Microsoft is aiming to do with this. And I think that's really important, and I'm really looking forward to seeing that come across all applications, because it's really frustrating. You've been working on something, you want to bring it back quickly, but how do you get it? How do you find it? There are so many ways you can do that. And let's bring that consistent search experience into Windows as well, and that's going to be great. Now, the last announcement that I want to talk about in today's episode is the Fluid Framework. Okay, so what is the Fluid Framework? So this is basically about taking objects from one application and being able to share them in another application. Doesn't matter what the application is. So you can take an object like a table from Excel, you can open it up in Word, you can share that object, and you can co-author that object in almost, well, what Microsoft is saying is real time, so instantaneous that you basically won't be able to notice any kind of delay. Now, I think it's no secret that Google G Suite has a better co-authoring experience than Office 365. It's the only thing that G Suite is basically better at doing than Office 365. And the Fluid Framework is going to help address that problem. What else can I say about it? So this is basically bringing something like we already have in Windows, like OLE, objects that you can already paste from Excel, an Excel table into Word, for instance, and it's going to expand that and kind of make it web cloud compatible, if you like. So rather than just being limited to those Office applications, you could take maybe an Excel table and co-author it and share it in Teams. Now, this is a framework, which means, of course, it'll be available primarily in Office 365 applications initially, but Microsoft is going to make it available to developers, so they will be able to include it in their own applications. And again, this is Microsoft basically trying to offer a more people-centric experience rather than having to think, which application do I need to edit this document or this object in? How am I going to share it and co-author it with my colleagues? It should all be something that is kind of transparent and not dependent on opening a particular application. We should be able to do it wherever we happen to be working at the time. Microsoft had a really cool demo of this at Build, which also involved translating, I think, English from into 8 different languages simultaneously, which was also quite impressive. That wasn't actually connected to the Fluid Framework, but was done using cognitive services, I should say, and that was really cool, of course. And in this kind of, co-authoring scenario, that kind of translation service makes a lot of sense. And you can see all of that happening instantaneously in real time, and it's pretty cool. So hopefully we'll get some more demos of that soon. Again, not sure exactly when that's all going to become available. But those are the 4 major announcements that I think, as an IT professional, you will probably be interested in from Build. And in the upcoming episodes, I'm going to look at these things in a little bit more detail. I hope it's going to be more than just me sitting here chatting, maybe chatting with other people, maybe, of course, giving some demos so you can actually see some of this stuff happening on the screen. But I hope to cover this kind of stuff and more user-orientated stuff as well in future episodes. So that's it from me, and hope to see you next week.